in the last session. So I took the approach with this one that I was going to get into annotations and kind of see where it was going to take me. When we talk annotations, we talk anything from dimensions to notes to cross-hatching and surface finish symbols and how to handle and deal with all of that. So as I started to look at this, one theme initially came out very clear as an area that I don't think I was fully aware of all the different methods that were there for taking and creating dimensions that are useful enough to be placed on drawings and all the different methods. Before we get started here, just a couple of polls here. Go ahead and launch the first poll. Just a little bit about your job description. 10 years ago you had designers and you had detailers. I'm under the assumption today those are the same people, and you're also engineers and doing all sorts of other things at the time. But do we have anyone who's just doing detailing? Go ahead and put your vote in here. Okay, most of you. All right, let's go ahead and just share those results. This is kind of what I expected. Most of you have dual jobs. There's at least one or two of you that are doing one or the other. This is going to focus on the detailing end of things. However, there is a huge crossover on the design side of things because of the way SolidWorks does things. Next poll. How many different methods would you say there is for adding dimensions or creating dimensions for drawings? And I just threw some numbers up there just to get an idea of different methods that you might see. Go ahead and toss your vote in there. Okay, let's go ahead and give you those results. This is the part that became a little bit shocking to me when I got into this, is looking at really all the different ways. And there is 4+. There's many different ways of creating dimensional values that can be used on drawings to give you accurate drawings. And I wanted to cover those today and all those different methods because I think they're important. They all have their own benefits. And lastly, just some more obscure annotations. I've used the following while detailing. These are some of the other topics that we might be covering today. Go ahead and pop your vote in there. It's good to see as you folks are using styles. Not many using layers. I know some people have been to 2012 because you're using magnet lines. So good. So we have at least people using some of the functionality that's out there. But we're going to cover some of this stuff as well. So let's go ahead and get started here. What I want to cover today, and again, the theme that kind of came out of this is it really focused on dimensions, and then I'll cover some of the other topics. But we want to go over what is an annotation view and how we deal with annotation views in a solid model, and how those annotation views actually become drawing views with notes or with dimensions on them. The difference between marked for drawing and not marked for drawing, how to turn on and off that setting by default. That's something you may or may not be aware of. We're going to talk about smart dimension. We're all used to using smart dimension in a solid model situation, but you have some extra capabilities when it gets to the drawing side of things. There's a couple other commands in there, one called rapid dimensions and the other one is DimExpert, and we're going to show the DimExpert in a couple different ways as well. A couple options I want to point out while inserting model items. Again, we're going to focus on inserting dimensions into the drawing side, but we're going to talk about placement and where some of that stuff comes from. I do want to quickly go over center marks and center lines and then talk about putting things together. We talked about views. How do I create predefined views that include center marks and center lines and my dimensions? Okay, basically giving you a detailed drawing that you can go in and just do some basic cleanup on. We want to talk a little bit about layers, a little bit about notes, a tool called the Format Painter if you haven't used it yet, and real quick showing us magnetic lines for 2012. Now, annotation views. Annotation views is something that we use inside the solid model to assign annotations. When I say annotations, it doesn't necessarily mean dimensions, but it can be dimensions. Okay, there's some techniques in both a solid for sheet metal specific designs or just solid models, and we can take those annotation views and bring them into a drawing. So let's take a look at where I'm focusing at. I'm in a solid part file, and we're used to having the annotation folder in the feature tree. If I right-click on that folder, we're used to being able to turn on and off feature dimensions from here. But if I want to go down just a little bit further, there's an option in here titled Automatically Place into Annotation Views. This is what's going to help us create the views that are needed for the drawing. There's also the option to create your own annotation views. Now, if I expand the folder, there's only one thing in there by default. It's titled Unassigned Items. So watch what happens as I start to draw here. And we'll just design something very simple. We'll grab our Smart Dimension command and maybe place a few dimensions. 60 by 60, and we'll go ahead and extrude that thing some distance. Make that 25. Now, once you've started to model, what the system is going to do, based upon this option, automatically place into annotation views, is to try to figure out which view the annotation is best shown in. Now, you'll notice now under Unassigned, I now have front and top. If I right-click on front, I have some options for that front annotation view. First of all, if I want to activate it, okay, this shows us which dimensions are in that activated annotation view. Now, if my dimension features are turned off, you'll get this message. Display of feature dimensions is off. Would you like to turn them on? When you activate the annotation view, it will show you what annotations are tied to that particular view. Now, I want to use the word annotation and not dimension because realistically, this could be notes, it could be GD&T, it could be other things that you add to a solid model that can be added to these annotation views. If I wanted to see what's been unassigned, I double-click on Unassigned. There are no dimensions unassigned. I have the 25 dimension going to the top view. Now, here's one of the things that you might do is you might put your model in a top view and position the dimension relative to the model as you prefer it. If I want to look at my front view, I may come here, do the same for my front dimensions, and space them where I would like to relative to the model. Now again, as I design, this is going to continue to work for me. So I can come in here, maybe add a new feature in here. We'll go ahead and extrude it. Maybe even add a taper in here. Let's come in with a fillet, throw that around the outside, and accept it. Now, looking at this, we're now able to see what is a part of my annotation views. If I go to the top view now, you can see that it added the radius value to the top view as well as the extrusion depth of the post there. Let's take a look at what it added automatically to the front view. See if anything was added there. Everything looks good there. If I go to unassigned items, you can see that there's now a angular dimension that it's not sure where it wants to assign that annotation to. Now, how many of you have been in a drawing and you've inserted model items and some of the dimensions may not have come through? Well, sometimes SolidWorks doesn't know which view is best to attach those model items. So it isn't able to place those within the drawing environment. Now what you can do, if you were to right-click on the dimension that's showing, I can change the annotation view by selection, and I can give it an annotation view that I want to tie it to. In this case, we'll tie it to my top. This one ain't going to let me tie it at the top. I should be able to. Select the planar face. There, we'll select a plane. This should tie it similar to the top view. Let's see here. Oh, still won't do it. Let's see what it changed. Now this one wants to select the planar face to orient the annotation. We'll orient it, tell it to change annotation view. Okay, in this case it's creating a new annotation view, which is essentially the same as the top. Okay, where I can show that on the top view. But this will also help it to perform the import on the insert model items. Now sometimes you'll add an annotation in here. I'm going to insert, let's say something differently like a note. We'll type in a note value here, and you can see that it's already assigned it to a view. Okay, it automatically went to the front view. You will have the option, if it feels it can move it to one of those other views, that you can specify, you know what, I needed this to be part of the top annotation view. Now if I go to my top, you can see that that note now belongs to that particular view. And again, what you're trying to do is position these where you would like them for the drawing end. Okay, now how do we get this information into a drawing? Well, this is going to happen a couple different ways. Let's first of all save the part here. We'll go ahead and create a drawing the traditional way. Make drawing from part. Now we're used to this option over here, which is our view palette, which helps us to create the drawing views. Now you'll notice the little A in front of the views. These are your annotation views. Okay, these are the ones that are stored in the model. Now let's do this a couple different ways. Now if I just drag one of them in, you'll notice the dimensions didn't come with it. Okay. If before I drag it in, I turn on this option to import annotations, what I'm looking for is the design annotations. I can now drag those in, and the result will be the dimensions and annotations that I provided at the solid model level. Okay, their positioning relative to the view will be related to where you left them in the solid model using the annotation view. This is the annotation view that had the draft angle. Here we can, oh, I guess it didn't bring that one in. And that's all I had for annotation views. So it's a way of adding other things as well, like notes, GD&T, getting your dimensions kind of organized, using the annotation views to bring them in. Now if I were to not use the dimension palette and I decided I wanted to make the drawing from part, and instead of using the dimension palette, I went ahead and using something like model view, the only thing you're looking for here is in the orientation options, you'll have import annotations. What annotations would I like to import? Okay, anything that's an annotation view, notice it shows up in a different icon here with the A over the top of it. So I can tell it to create multiple views. And we should get all the dimensions associated with both of those views by dropping it in. So I guess this is a way of getting ahead of the curve slightly, creating dimensions and positioning dimensions so that when you get to the drawing, things are a little bit easier on that front. All right. Dimensions marked for drawing, dimensions not marked for drawing. It's a very simple option in SolidWorks, and SolidWorks has chosen to choose one of these options for you by default, but it does have an impact on what you get when you bring dimensions into a drawing. So let's go look at that. It's a very, very simple concept. When I go to a dimension and I'm adding dimensions, let's say to a sketch, there's an icon within the modify box that is always turned on by default. It's marked dimension to be imported into a drawing. Now all that really does is marks it. It doesn't do the import for you. It doesn't take any further steps for you. Now inside your options, under drawings, the third option down says mark all part or assembly dimensions for import into drawings by default. That's what sets that icon on by default. Now when I create a drawing from this, where we would use that tool, and let me throw a view on here, is when we use insert model items, which I'm going to cover a little bit more of in a few moments. But when I insert model items, I have two choices. Do I want to insert the dimensions marked for the drawing, or there's dimensions not marked for a drawing? So the moral of this information is, realistically, when you're modeling, and if you're going to use this insert model method, you're going to have to remember to either turn it on or turn it off, depending on whether or not you know that dimension needs to be utilized in a drawing environment. Okay, and that will allow for the import. More dimension information. Now we're going to focus on smart dimensions and introduce some of the options contained within smart dimensions. I'm not going to go through smart dimension as it relates to design of a solid model, but more how it interacts on the drawing level. There's a couple options within that, one called rapid dimension, and there's also DimExpert. I'm going to show each of those, and then we're going to cover the insert model items tool. So let's go to something we can use for smart dimension here. Let's just place this more centered in the screen. When I select smart dimension on a drawing, we really end up with two tabs inside the dimension dialog. And the first tab is going to be named really depending on your selection. The default selection looks like this, where it says smart dimensioning, and this allows you to use your smart dimension tool within the environment. Now I'm going to turn off rapid dimension for a moment. We're all used to this concept. You pick a dimension location, you drop it. You pick a dimension case and you drop it. I do want to point out in 2012, if you make an incorrect selection for your dimension, you hit escape one time, it will release your second selection, and you could just make one selection again and fix it. Before, you had to reselect both items when you're having a multi-select dimension. So we're all used to that side of things. But what rapid dimension brings to the table is really the positioning of the dimensions relative to the model edge. Now before I go into rapid dimension, I want to take you to the tools options for a moment. Under document properties, under dimensions, there's a section here called offset distances. Anytime you're laying out dimensions, you can specify what the default offset distance is from the model and the offset distance from another annotation. Now with this information set, using Smart Dimension, you'll have this rapid dimensioning option, which we're all used to. It's on by default. But what happens is as I grab something that's intended to be dimensioned, you'll notice that I end up with this, we'll call it a pie, and the pie allows me to select where in the annotation view I want to place the annotation. But notice its spacing relative to the model edge. Even if I go to this bottom left-hand quadrant, the dimension is going to be that distance from the model edge that's specified in your options. Okay, so regardless of which direction you go. Now, in cases where you're placing dimensions to the right or left of the model, I'm going to do a couple of these here, the software can also reposition dimensions. And the spacing that it's using to reposition them is really based upon, again, those dimensional values and options that you have specified. Okay, so it makes it really easy with rapid dimension to flop some dimensions on here real quick. Okay, so there's a little bit about rapid dimension. Now the one that's really neat and kind of sparked some more interest is DimExpert. DimExpert does a couple things. Let's go ahead and turn it on first of all. If you haven't seen any of the DimExpert tools, this is going to be something unique to you, in that the software is not looking at how it was dimensioned in the model. It's looking at how it needs to dimension it based upon datums that you provide. Now the schemes that we can use are polar or linear dimensioning. We can use baseline or chain dimensions as well. What we need to do is select a vertex or a whole center, okay, or 0, 0 essentially, and then tell it what type of dimensioning I'm going to use, in this case linear dimensioning. From there, all I'm doing is selecting feature edges. Okay, I might zoom in here, select the inside edge of this hole, and the software is going to figure out all the dimensions it needs to locate that hole. But you want to notice that it also understands if there's multiple instances. So I had to dimension all the instances in the positioning for each of those instances. Notice it put the instance number automatically on here and positioned all 4 holes from that 0 point. Now this is still on. It's a live tool. I can go ahead and make another selection if I like. And as soon as I make the selection, it's going to position those dimensions for that linear selection. You can probably guess at this point where it's getting the spacing information. Whatever's set in your tool's option is the spacing that it's going to use here. Okay, so this is the DimExpert when it comes to using it on a SolidWorks drawing. Now I want to show you another part of DimExpert that's done at the solid model level. If I open a part such as this, we're used to the whole idea that the dimensions that I use in a part aren't necessarily the same dimensions I need to have on a drawing to manufacture this per ANSI standard. So when I get to a drawing, have to choose which dimensions I want to reuse and which dimensions I have to add manually. Well, this is where DimExpert in a solid model comes into play, and we're going to show how that gets into the drawing level. There's another tab next to your Configuration Manager called the DimExpert Manager. Now, I want to be clear that DimExpert in a solid model does not care if it was built in SolidWorks, so this will work on imported models as well. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to specify your auto dimensioning scheme. So tell it what type of part we're dealing with, prismatic or turned part, what type of tolerancing we're using, plus minus, what kind of patterning dimensioning we're using, linear or polar, and then we specify the datum structure that we'll use to dimension this. So let's say my primary datum's here, my secondary datum is here, and my tertiary is this sidewall. Now I want you to notice at the bottom, I have a choice to dimension all features or just particular features. Maybe there's a particular slot that you want to get all the dimensions for, or a series of holes that you want to import into the drawing. What the software is going to do is analyze the part geometrically and try to figure out what type of features it has, and then it's going to apply the dimensional values to locate those features. Now when we say features in this case, it's not features like we think about in our everyday SolidWorks design. We don't have notches. We don't have slots. We don't have cones, pockets. Okay, what this does is it does a feature recognition of the solid model looking for these types of items. Now if I hit the OK button here, it's going to go ahead and show me at the very top all the different types of features that it found. And I can click on them one by one, and they'll highlight in a darker shade of green. Found all the chamfers, it found any cylinders. Now what it does also is it creates annotation views. We just introduced those earlier. We have now 3 annotation views and then our unassigned items. Now we know how to work with this. We can go ahead and start to hide some of the annotation views if I'd like by right-clicking on them. And I can see if there are any unassigned items, and there isn't in this case. So let's hide the unassigned and let's take a look at the front view. Now this is just like I introduced earlier. Your job at this point is to go to that particular view looking straight on the front and position those dimensions where you would like them, so when we get to the drawing, these items are where exactly you want them. Once you have one done, go ahead and activate another. You might have to hide the other one and go to my right view. We had one dimension, which is a chamfer, and activate the last view and position the dimensions. A couple other things about the DimExpert while we're in here. The DimExpert tool can also allow us to see the status of the model. In other words, is it fully defined using the dimensions? Are all the features fully defined? Okay. Now, if I were to delete one of these dimensions, just going to delete it right out of here. I'm not deleting a driving dimension. It's not something the model uses to create a feature. It's just an annotation that we're going to use on the drawing. But if I look at my plus-minus tolerancing, you can see that the hole size the hole itself is yellow. This is letting me know that, hey, I don't have all the dimensions I need to locate that particular item. Now, if I go to Smart Dimension in a solid model, I now have 2 other options here. DimExpert Location Dimension, DimExpert Size Dimension. In this case, I can come in here, put a DimExpert Size Dimension on there, and it recognizes the feature that it needs. And if I look at my tolerance status, I'm now back to fully green. This is when I know I have all the dimensions I need for a drawing. Now, there's a lot to DimExpert. In the options, and I'll just show you this, there is an entire DimExpert section which says when you find this size dimension, here's what the tolerancing needs to be for the different types. So you set your default tolerancing for location dimensions, change dimensions, GD&T chamfers, and then you have different display and control options associated with this. The reason I bring it up in this conversation is because we can take now and have a fully defined drawing without having to go through the pains that we're just showing of insert model items or manually detailing. From here, I use what we showed earlier. Make drawing from part. When I want the annotation views, now I'm importing annotations, but I'm not using design annotations. I'm using DimExpert annotations. And from here, I can go ahead and pop those in, and all of my DimExpert annotations should show from there. Pop another one in here. Make sure I got my import DimExpert annotations. Same option. Let's go to. Okay, so we have the ability to get those dimensions in from the drawing, from the solid model using DimExpert. One other example of that, I just wanted to show you that it will also do GD&T. So if we came in here and decided our scheme is going to be geometric tolerancing, gave it a primary, secondary, and tertiary datum structure, and allowed it to recognize the features. And again, all the defaults for all your material conditions and callouts are all options within the tool. Okay. Now back to my drawing for a moment. Hopefully everyone's fairly comfortable with what we covered so far. Back to Smart Dimension. There is also an auto dimension option within Smart Dimension for drawings. We're used to auto dimension, where you can right click on a sketch, select auto dimension, and it will dimension it based upon your datums or origins you provide. Well, it works the same way on drawings as well. What is it I would like to dimension? All entities in the view. Which scheme would I like? Okay, where's my basically my zero datum location? And biggest thing we need to provide is an origin location. Do I want the dimensions placed right or left, top or bottom? And the software is going to go ahead and auto dimension. Now I had the other view on here, so we have quite a few dimensions like our corners. Okay, but it was able to give me all the dimensions needed for all the geometry in that particular view. Okay, so that's our auto dimension. Okay, a couple other things. Start a new part for a moment here. And sketch something. But I want to place a couple dimensions on here, but I'm going to place them within the model, kind of not even in the right position. And we'll go ahead and extrude this thing, because this is how a lot of people, they're not worried about their dimension placement while they're designing. Now if I were to save this, and I want to create a drawing view, save here, create a drawing view of this. There's some problems that I might run into when bringing the annotations forward. I'm not going to use the import annotations. I didn't set up annotation views, so we're just going to drop the particular view in there into the model. So this is what a lot of people are doing. They're starting with a blank model, and they need to either use Smart Dimension or import model items. If we use insert model items, and I showed you this earlier, you have marked for drawing or not marked for drawing. I didn't change any of that on these two. But there's one other option at the very bottom I want to show, which is use dimension placement from sketch. That is on by default. So if I were to insert those model items, look where those things are located. Okay, they're located exactly where I left them as I was modeling. Well, if you're anything like me while you're modeling, you're not really worried about where a dimension is. A lot of times you're moving and sliding these things around just to be able to see around other dimensions. So you don't do the detailing diligence, which is a possibility up front. So what is your options? Well, I showed you this section under document properties that allows you to set your offset distances. Once again, that's going to come into play here. If I insert my model items and I decide to turn off use this dimension placement, they will use the offset dimension values that are specified in the options. So again, another way of getting it clean. Now, it might seem at this point like a hodgepodge of information regarding dimensions, and I really don't think one way is better than another way. I do think, however, that the world in the CAD world is going a lot further towards being able to do a lot of detailing on the solid model. There seems to be getting a lot more designers that do their own detailing, which you folks are attesting to, where you can think about some of the detailing aspects up front. Now, what I've just shown you is a bunch of tools that allows you to come up with what you feel is the best standard. To start, maybe you create annotation views. Maybe you just model and use DimExpert. But you have options to do some things ahead of time that are going to help you when it gets to the drawing and creating the drawing view. Now, I'm going to use my same block here that we've been working with. Let's open this thing up. I want to talk just real briefly about center marks and center lines, and then I want to get you to a point where you may be able to auto-create some drawings using center marks, center lines, and annotations, a way of getting some automation involved here. In our tools options, under document properties, and I always have a little bit of trouble finding this, annotations, let's see here, detailing, no, I know I found it earlier. Auto insert on view creation is what I'm looking for. Display style, it's got to be in the document. Let's see here. I apologize for not remembering exactly where this was. Auto insert on view creation for anyhow, well, we'll talk about this. I'll find it. Center marks and center lines have an option so that when you create the drawing view, you want it to auto insert on view creation the center marks and center lines. And the reason I'm bringing this up now is because the ability to be able to create a drawing that's, let's say, half detailed for you without notes and so on is possible within this system. So when I go ahead and make a drawing from a part, you'll notice, and by default I believe some of this stuff is on, as I drag views in, notice I get my center marks and center line information automatically. Now there are options for this. Now I'm going to go ahead and do due diligence because I forgot where the location was. Auto insert center lines. Because this is what you would do, right? Centerline annotations. Okay, options, document properties, detailing, auto insert on view creation. So I must just missed it here. Options, detailing, auto insert on view creation. We can choose to automatically insert center marks for holes, for fillets, slots. Okay, holes in assembly, fillets in assembly, slots in assembly. Auto insert center lines, auto insert balloons, and here's another one. Auto insert dimensions marked for drawing. So if you use that function where you turn on and off those dimensions, all of this will be dictated when you create a view. Now that being said, you can see what happens. I can auto create that particular view. But what happens if I want to auto-insert my design dimensions using Annotation Views, bring in all my center marks and center lines into a drawing. Well, in our last Lunch and Learn, we talked about the ability to do predefined views. Well, what I want to point out here is now with predefined views, notice you can set by default that you want whatever gets placed in this view, I want you to import the annotations. And what annotations do you want to import? Well, automatically go grab any design annotations that are assigned to Annotation Views. Now the same thing goes as I'm setting this thing up for projected views. I can make sure that any dimensions that I need are going to be placed within these views. I'll pop that over here, just going from each view. Okay, that should do what I needed to do. Now when I go ahead and actually I might have done that wrong. These might have to be just model views. But at the point where you want to create this drawing, when you actually load a model to it, okay, it's going to go ahead and mine didn't bring in my annotations because I don't have annotation views for this one. But it will bring in your annotations, bring in your center marks, center lines, automatically populate your views. Now, where in the real world can you use this? Let's say we set up a template that was set up so that it was automatically pulling the 3 views in an isometric. Each of those views were set up by default to import your annotations using design annotations, or DimExpert annotations for that matter. And you could go as a designer, design the model, specify all the dimensions that you need for a drawing, whether it be through Annotation Views or DimExpert annotations. And then you could run this overnight using the task scheduler. For those of you who are not aware of the task scheduler, if we go to SolidWorks Tools and the task scheduler, one of the options in the task scheduler, now I will be aware, I think this is part of professional or premium. This is professional. What you have to be able to do, there's an option here for creating drawings. So you just tell it, here are all the parts or assemblies I want you to create drawings, and I want you to use this drawing template with predefined views. Now this takes us to that next level, and not only is it going to create the views, but it's also possibly able to bring in your center marks, center lines, and annotations that you've already specified to be created on the drawing. Now I hope that that gives you some idea as to how far you can go with automating some of these items. Now a couple last minute things that I want to show here as part of the webinar. Let's just throw a couple dimensions on here. The Format Painter. The Format Painter is for notes and dimensions. What that does is if you select a dimension and decide you want it to look a certain way, let's say you want to add a bilateral tolerance to it, plus or minus a certain value. You want it to center the text, add symbols, those types of things. What you can do is use the Format Painter on the Annotation toolbar to copy the properties from one dimension to another. So I select the dimension, grab my Format Painter, and it says click or box select entities in which to copy. And I select the other one and it applies the same values to that dimension. Notice it doesn't change the dimension, but it will add the tolerances. If there's any other text data in there, that can be stored as well. I saw most of you are using styles. I think that's very important. Styles are located in the dimension and note boxes that you see in drawings. First thing I need to do is add a style. I can call this Kevin style or company standard, whatever I want. Once I've created the style, I can also save it out and share it with the rest of my design group. SLD-STL would be the file format. But very simply, let's place another dimension on here. If I wanted to apply that style to another dimension, I can load the style from the server, something we're sharing, or if it's already loaded in this model, I can just select it and it will apply those values. I saw most of you are using styles. I think that's fantastic. It's definitely something you can take advantage of. And to finalize things today, I think layers are very important when AutoCAD was the big tool, and you needed to be able to clear the slate of information. I mean, obviously with SolidWorks, you can hide all your dimensions pretty easily just by right-clicking on annotations and hiding them. But to be able to sort between dimensions and notes and tables, I think layers are real nice. For those of you who have not used them, if you turn on the layer box, it's so simple to work with layers inside of SolidWorks. Create your new layer. We can call it dimensions. And as you create dimensions, okay, you can just make sure that your dimension layer is specified. And now these dimensions will be on that layer. What that allows you to do, and I can actually swap these ones onto a dimension layer using the layer dialog. I can just say move those to there. But what this allows me to do is now I can control the colors very easily. I can control whether or not they're hiding or showing very easily. Okay, just using the layer dialog. It makes it really easy to organize that information. And also, as you're adding stuff, anything you're adding, almost all the dialogues have an option for layer at the bottom. I think it's a nice way of just getting better organized with the information. Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone for attending today's Lunch and Learn. I know we didn't cover a lot of the annotations. I kind of found that dimensional group of information. I'm probably going to cover some more annotations in future Lunch and Learns. If you have any questions, please post them in the question section. I also really encourage you to send me an email at kevin@caddimensions.com and let me know if there's topics that you want to specifically barrel into. Now, it can be something very specific, like going into SmartMates or wanting to get into smart components, or I'm always looking for the areas that you folks are wanting to learn or get into. Now, I know we only touched a little bit here. If there's something more you want to cover in annotations to go a little bit further, I can surely add that to the next section, but I look forward to an email from you folks. But thanks for attending today, and we'll talk to you soon.